Welcome to another episode of the Apex Perspective podcast. Today, I get the absolute pleasure to sit down with Joe Vallone, who is currently the Chief AI Officer and Chief Information Officer at Outcome 360. Now, Joe started off with a technical background. He's led at the executive level of multiple companies. He's also been a business owner as well. But Joe, can you tell me a little bit more about your perspective, from your background from your perspective, and how it led you to going towards this technical route?
Sure. And first of all, let me just say thanks, Arian, for having me. Looking forward to this, and I've seen some of your previous podcasts, so I think this aligns pretty well. So with that out of the way, my background is I started my career as an engineer, computer engineer. I did a lot of work with very early on with embedded systems and then got to work with deeply embedded operating systems. So some of my early stuff, people are always like, "Well, what do you did software, you did hardware. What are you most, what are some of your accomplishments that you're most proud of?" And I would say early on in my career, it had to do with things like we had an operating system that we created for braking systems. So the ABS braking systems, anti-lock, that is just part of your everyday travel. That's my software.
Mhm.
um,
Wow.
in Orlando, we have the Tower
Wow.
of Terror ride, right? That's my
Wow.
software. So the braking systems that are involved in the Tower of Terror ride, that's my stuff.
Very interesting.
Later on, I moved that to embedded systems with telecommunications, and so I was working with Nokia. So if you've ever used a Nokia phone, if you're old enough to remember a Nokia phone and you've ever played music or video, then you've used my software. So we
Huh.
worked on the audio side of things. So anything that transpired in an audio side of a phone was all my team's work at. So music player, radio, answering a call. Um, People want sound with their videos. They don't watch
Mhm.
silent movies anymore. So all of that audio stuff was all mine.
Excellent.
And it was at Nokia that I got a taste for the executive level. I was uh, mentored into a program that Nokia established for their next generation of execs. And
Mhm.
Nokia, as you know, historically had made some really bad investment decisions, really bad marketing decisions, and so I left Nokia and went into the digital. I became a vice president of engineering after I got my MBA while I was at Nokia. I
Mhm.
kind of went into the dark side of things, economics and finance. So I know, Arian, you're kind of looking at that economics world, and so I really kind of fell in love with that and really
Mhm.
developed a passion around those things. And then started working in executive. Digital transformation. So working with executives at
Right.
different companies that were trying to transform, and a lot of that work was done around digital transformations of lean and
Mhm.
agile, more efficient, better ways of doing things, and then eventually it became tools and other things that they used to help with those digital transformations. So I see
Right.
when I became the chief AI officer of Outcomes 360, I see the parallels there, and that experience fed directly into the areas of AI because there are companies right now. It's anytime you have this kind of disruption and you bring that disruption into a business, it is a transformation. Whether you
Right.
want to call it that or not, there are going to be changes in behavior. There are going to be cultural impacts.
Mhm.
All of those things are going to have to be, I
Accounted
don't
for.
know if I'd use the word managed, but certainly need
Okay.
to be accounted for.
Right. And I've done some research on digital transformations and the statistics behind what's the success rate, and it's quite low. So you've been involved, in, I'm sure, multiple of them. I believe it's only about 33% that are actually successful. Do you know why that is so? And what do you think is being potentially underestimated?
Yeah. So when you're talking about digital transformation, and again, I'm using this term loosely, more abstractly, because
Mhm.
we can be talking about this from an AI transformation way, and then we can talk about this from just transformation in general.
Sure.
Company A buys company B. There is going to be a cultural change as a reason. There's going to be an impact. There's going to be a transformation as part of that. So this goes on in business all the time. But in terms of your point about the success, a lot of that really depends on. I have seen in my experience, I have seen some absolutely epic failures, and it doesn't have to do with, oh, we chose the wrong transformation, or we chose the wrong model, or we chose the wrong people, or we chose the wrong. That starts the failure points start way earlier than that in a transformation, and those have to do with the values and the principles that you're using, because the values and the principles are the right ways to solve these problems for your organization. Your organization is not going to go out and go, oh, well, I like Elon Musk's values and principles, so we're going to take those and we're going to use that. No, they're your corporation, your organization's values and principles. And if you're not clear on that, you have no idea how you're going to form the strategy. And what I run into in a lot of cases is businesses saying the word strategy, but as an overloaded term. In my studies, there was this great paper introduced by a guy by the name of Hambrick, and I think it's dated, but it's still relevant. So circa 2001-ish timeframe. And the name of the paper, aptly named, was "Are You Sure You Have a Strategy?" That's the actual title of the paper. It's an academic paper. Hambrick and somebody else. And in that, it talks about when executives say that they have a strategy, and here's the strategy, oftentimes they're talking about goals. They're not talking about a strategy. A strategy encompasses much more. There are arenas. Where are we going to play? There's, the vehicles. How are we going to get there? There are many, many other components of these strategies that Hambrick calls the diamond model of these different areas. And so if you're not concentrating on the values and the principles of the organization, and ultimately, plug for my company, ultimately, what are the outcomes you want to achieve? Not the output, but the outcomes, the definitive outcomes. And I find that area as where people get lost, and that leads to the abject failures. They stop concentrating on their values and the principles, and they start concentrating on these shiny new objects and things that they want to do.
Right. And I think that's a common situation with AI is just because there's a massive wave of AI here and a lot of hype around AI, you can say, there's a use of it just for the sake that AI exists. But if you're not having a specific idea of what kind of impact you want to create, and you're just using AI just for the sake of it, then there's not going to be real impact there. Now, the other component behind any kind of transformation is potentially the issue of not engaging all the stakeholders involved, or that the stakeholders involved properly in these transformations. So what's your take on that? Is that one of the main reasons why you see, an unsuccessful transformation?
Well, it's two things there. It is, you're absolutely right about not involving the stakeholders. That is definitively an error. But even worse than that is the failure to measure the business value and the outcomes, right? And I'm not talking about the traditional lagging metrics. We did well in this quarter. Well, when do you find that out? You find that out after the quarter and you publish your results. What about in between? How are you measuring those things? And are you really performing like a lean startup? Are you getting constant feedback? The interesting thing about leading indicators is that there is no standard for leading indicators. They are all specific to the products and services that your company is working on. And so you need to be able to measure those. You don't want to wait to the end of the quarter or the end of a project that is a high revenue driver and find out, whoopsies, this isn't going to return the value that we thought. Every business school I've ever been to has hammered away, ignore sunk costs, ignore sunk costs, ignore sunk costs. And then you get into the real world and everybody's talking about, well, we've already put this much work into it. We should just continue because we've already put this much work into it. No, evaluate whether you want to put that amount of work, and are you going to realize the value associated with that?
Exactly. Yes, I think that's a very strong point. I think leading with a strategy and finding out at the last, right at the end, that you're not on track to actually hitting those targets and getting the ROI is a complete waste of a quarter. I think that
Or
having the go ahead, please.
I was going to say, just apologies for interrupting, but
No
I
worries.
was just going to say, or looking at that and knowing upfront that it's going to be a loss. There are certain things that you do in business and you know they're going to be a loss because you have to do it because your competitor is going to do it. You can quantify that, absolutely, and you should know it and say, look, we're going to open up this office in, say, China. We know initially that's a losing proposition for us. How much are we going to lose? How much are we willing to invest until we, pull the plug on that? That should be estimated and known and tracked. You don't want to find that out at the end. You want to find that out during it and say, make the feedback, the evaluation, and say, do we want to continue doing this? We're losing money. We understand that this is losing money, and we're okay with that, or we're not. This is losing way more than we thought we would. Let's not do this anymore. Let's pull the plug.
Especially for startups, understanding how much risk you can take is very important. And if you're over leveraging the risk and you find that out at the very end, that can be the end of a startup, in fact. So I think it's a very important perspective.
That's a critical point, and there's two pieces to that. There's actually a LinkedIn article that I'm writing right now, and this has direct impact to artificial intelligence and the way that companies are doing their digital transformation. The things that are making headlines today around that are companies saying, well, we're laying off people because we now have all these synergies. First of all, I doubt that. I doubt that highly. I think you're laying people off because you violated your fiduciary duty. As an executive, well, let's call it what it is. As a CEO, you have one and only one job, and that job is to create shareholder wealth. Period. End of sentence. That's your job. Now, do I think that that's what a CEO does when he hits his desk every morning? Well, there's many, 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 many ways to create that value. Sometimes ethical, sometimes not. Sometimes legal, sometimes not. If you're going out there and you're saying, I'm laying these people off because of AI, what that tells me is one of two things. Either A, you overhired and now you're trying to get rid of that, and you don't want to take the hit to your stock, or if you're a private company, your reputation, because they'd be like, oh, well, you're in charge and you goofed up, and you're paid enormous sums of money to not goof up and not be reactive. You're paid enormous sums of money to be proactive. You're being reactive, and we don't like that. But if you AI wash it and say, we're getting so much gains and efficiency out of all the tools we brought in our new strategy that we don't need these people anymore. Okay, then my return to that would be, my retort to that would be, hey, if you've got all this excess capacity now, why don't you invest that and grow your company? Right? Take the resources that you're not using, and by resources, I'm talking about everything other than people. People are people, resources are resources. Reinvest that. Grow your company. Look at all the different things that you could build. So there's two types of companies. There are companies that go, we can deliver the same or equal with less people. Let's cut those people. Okay? It's not really, it's a temporary, it's not really doing your fiduciary duty. You're not creating shareholder wealth. You're compromising and cutting expenses. You'll get a little profitability bump, but it's temp. Meanwhile, your competitors are doing other things. They're looking at this and saying, wow, we just freed up a ton of capacity and we can get a lot more done, and we can build a lot more things, and we can expand. Those are visionary companies. Those are companies that have new products and services that they're going after, right? So I see that as real dichotomy in the marketplace today. It's not totally binary; it's a bit of a spectrum, but I see that
Yeah.
as impact.
Very interesting. Now, I want to get your opinion on the state of leadership today, and then we're going to go forward with some perspectives on AI, of course. Now, we've seen recently the CEO of Coca-Cola step down recently, and it's because the
Mhm.
board wants to go towards an AI-driven route. My understanding is that it looks like leadership requires now not just operations perspective, but also a technical perspective potentially as well. So, what do you think are the new gaps in leadership today, and do you think that that the CEO stepping down could be indicative that's already changing now?
Yeah, I don't know all of the reasons
Hmm.
why that person stepped down.
Hmm.
And there may be some other pieces to that, but I
Sure.
think I think with executives today, um, one of the things that I think I have a different take. Can you go ahead and repeat your question again? I think I may have a
Of
different take to
course,
that answer.
of course, right. So I want to get your opinion on the state of leadership today, and my assumption with the CEO stepping down Coca-Cola,
Right.
or from what what the board was saying, is that the objective was to go towards an AI-driven route, and the current CEO did not have that exact skill set. So do you think that that's stepping down, and the state of leadership today requires potentially more of a technical perspective, and that's why there's a
Yeah, I
gap?
think it's that last part about the technical perspective. I'd have to label that one as I'm not sure they
Okay.
need that much of a technical perspective. They need to gain the knowledge. They need to understand what AI is, and they need to understand what it can and cannot do, and what
Hmm.
it should and should not be used for. So they need to
Hmm.
understand those basics. Do they need to understand what an attention is? Do they need to understand, head ends? Do they need to understand, the efficiencies of neural networks and weighted models? And no. Do they need to understand the differences between standard frontier labs and open source, open weight models? Maybe. Here's
Okay.
the thing. I've been pretty adamant about your AI strategy as an organization should be closely, emphatically aligned to your business strategy. So
Hmm.
I would get concerned as a board member if one of my executives came in and said, "Hey, this AI thing is really taking over, and we're going to completely change our strategy." No, you had a business strategy, and you communicated that
Hmm.
strategy in the beginning of the year.
Hmm.
Changes, sure, I get that. The market reacts, and you change accordingly. Makes sense. Feedback, driven loop. I don't think that you should wholesale scrap your strategy. I think AI
Hmm.
is a tool that helps you better achieve that strategy, right?
Hmm.
So I think you have to be really clear on what those indicators are, and I think you
Hmm.
also again have to monitor your progress using leading indicators to get to the goals that you're trying to get to. Not always waiting till the end and go, "Whoop, we didn't make it." All
Love
right,
that
what
perspective.
can you do
Yeah.
beforehand?
Mhm. Now, talking about AI at the enterprise level, I think that this is a very important conversation to have, because a lot of what can be seen is AI is being used just for the sake of AI, but not with potentially a
Yeah.
business strategy behind it. So, what is your take on that, and how do you think people should apply AI strategies at the enterprise level?
Yeah, so I I wrote a paper, an academic paper. Um, uh, yeah, so let me just you mentioned the fact that I'm a Georgetown professor, adjunct
Mhm.
professor, and I do that part time, but I'm also a doctoral student at Purdue University, and so I do write a lot of academic papers, especially around AI governance and things like that. And I wrote an academic paper called "The Paradox" because you saw early on a bunch of these studies that said, "Oh, there's a 95% failure or 85% failure rate," or something along those lines. And I think
Mhm.
when enterprise sees that kind of stuff, they go, "Whoa, what if I'm losing 95 cents out of every dollar that I put in, why would I do this? And that's a valid question, right?
Yeah.
And experimentation is only going to take so far. Well, in my examination, as I look through the data isn't there. There's a lot of hypotheses. There's a lot of non-public data sets and a lot of things like we surveyed a bunch of people and all that stuff. Does it comply with the central limit theorem? Are these data truly random? Most of them do not. So I question those numbers. I don't think it's anything close to 85 or 95%. Let me be clear on enterprise data. You should have some, or enterprise implementation of AI. You should have some failure. You should. If you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
Do I want 85% or 95% failure? No, that's indicative of a different problem. That's something, completely different. I think what you've got in where I see a lot of enterprise missing the mark, especially in development, is a lot of them don't start from the ground up. Meaning when I go in and I ask executives and they go, well, where do we start and what are we looking at? And we're bringing AI in and we're doing this and we're doing that. Okay, I ask them a question to start, and that is, what is your data strategy?
Mm-hmm.
And I usually get a look like you just showed me right there. My what? Your data strategy. You have data from your customers, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And you have GDPR and you're regulated and all that. Yeah. Okay. What are you doing with that data? How are you leveraging that? How are you protecting that? How is that going to be used within your AI ecosystem? Because garbage in, garbage out. Bad data, bad model training, bad results, hallucinations. So you got to start from the very beginning and make sure that stuff is ready to be used by an AI system, right? Because AI without the training, without the data, is just an algorithm.
Right. Absolutely. And agentic AI is a very interesting conversation as well.
Yeah.
There's risks to it, and there's also benefits to it. Now, I think what's really interesting about agentic AI is that it can actually automate a lot of workflows, but doing it at the enterprise level and doing it at scale opens it up to certain cybersecurity risks. So how do you approach with those kind of benefits and potential consequences?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. So, and the exponential way that AI is being used and adopted and the improvements. I mean, 6 months ago in AI is an eternity. The models were worse. Everything that we were doing is worse. ChatGPT Image 2 didn't exist. All these new features in Claude Code didn't exist. All these new features in Gemini didn't exist. So the frontier models, the exponential acceleration is just mind-numbing. I mean, forget Moore's law. This is something completely different, and it is exponential. And I think that some of the issues that we're running into this is so fast and people trying to keep up. Agentic AI is one of those areas. Now we have other types of things within agentic AI. And I think where things are going with agentic AI is we had, and this is another one of those posts that I made. We originally started in the beginning with prompt engineering, and engineering was the wave. And then people found out context. We need context. That's how prompts operate. So now it's context engineering. And now we're working in the age of harness engineering. And so what you need for these agents to behave themselves is the governance of the harness itself to be able to make sure that the AI agents are doing what you want them to do. That becomes even more critical as we start to move more towards headless agents that are not going to be interfacing with the user at all and going out and doing other types of things. So there's no UI interface there to tell them. So the only thing governing them really is sort of the harness, because we want eventually There are some things we want humans in the loop for, i.e., I need to launch a missile at someone. That's got to be a human thing.
And healthcare
Versus
and finance, you need
healthcare,
those.
exactly. And there are things we don't need them. I just need you to clean up my email, man. I'll just send an agent to go off and do that because the risk reward isn't all that bad, right?
Mhm. Right. So when it does come to those more complex industries like healthcare or finance, there are guardrails and there's governance that are set up. But do you think there'll ever be a point where we, because it can hallucinate, of course, and that'd be a massive mistake. But do you think there'll ever be a point in which we can actually automate certain tasks, even in sensitive industries?
Yeah. So it's really timely because I just wrote this policy brief on
Hmm.
merging EMR records. So when it comes to healthcare specifically, um, there are so many issues, and the first, and I don't mean this to be insulting to healthcare. It just kind of is. I mean, most of those doctors and healthcare systems, they still have old COBOL machines. I mean, they probably got rid of their Abacus a few weeks ago. It wouldn't surprise me if there's still some machine somewhere in some office that's running Windows 3.1 or something. This is just they're pretty far. Healthcare in general is starting to close the gap, but they're pretty far behind in those things.
Yeah.
And again, one of the biggest issues there is the data. They've acquired different healthcare systems. How do you bring those together for the patient's benefit?
Hmm.
A lot of that becomes dictated by really two policy areas, which is the 21st Century Cares Act, or Cures Act, sorry, 21st Century Cures Act, and HIPAA, right? At least in the US. I'm not talking about EU. Or Asia. But in the U.S., those are the main impacts, right, to those kinds of things. So HIPAA, we got to be compatible, and most people haven't read HIPAA, and so they're confused about what it covers, and people err on the side of overcaution a lot of times, and that prevents some of the acceleration. And then there's the 21st Century Cures Act, which has a segment in it that says your data must be compatible, and any intentional or any unintentional blocking of that data or obscuring of that data can result in a fine of up to $1 million per incident.
Right.
So again, data governance policy, if you want to, in the medical field, if you want to make sure that your patients are getting the best care, you've got to start there and making sure that your data is reliable for use.
Excellent. Now, one last topic before we move on to a little bit more about you is, as you know, Joe, I interviewed the principal engineer at Amazon, Naveen Jayakumar. He's starting to utilize coding tools that are AI-driven coding tools to start automating his work. A principal engineer is a highly technical skill and a highly technical role. So what do you think is the future of potentially software engineering roles, and which ones might survive in the future?
I think the software engineer role is going to remain the same in the sense that we're still trying to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
We're still trying to fix the overall issues that pop up in the nature, and instead of having to write each line of code and going in and debugging it and fixing it, I mean, I can remember debugging hardware and software, cyber physical systems, by turning lights on and off, right, just to be able to see. So,
Mm-hmm.
where the issues are. So we've come, a huge way since then. And as a software engineer, now you're just going to tell Claude and say, we have this issue, go fix it. Let me see what the fix is. Analyze this, analyze that. So I think that is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
What I hope to see is that results in an increase in quality.
Okay.
Being in software, being an ex-Apple guy, I'm horrified by what I see today in the marketplace, in the App Store, in SaaS apps, of just the slop and the junk that's out there. There's I mean, you could even look at it, oh, there's a new release for YouTube TV. Okay, let me do that. Oh crap, it broke something else. Oh, I got an iPhone and my iPhone is doing, oh, now they just released that and the updated operating system broke something else.
Mhm.
I'm seeing more and more of that. And the quality there seems to be less focus on the quality. And I'm hoping with the AIs and software engineering, I'm hoping that it's going to refocus them not so much on getting the code correct, but refocus them on the end user experience and why a
Mm,
better quality. Because if you don't have the quality, you're also opening yourself up to possible cyber attacks and security leaks and things like
of
that.
course.
So I don't think the right model is there for that yet.
Okay. Well,
Maybe
we'll do
Mythos
now.
is the answer. I don't know.
Okay. Okay. Well, now we'll go ahead and shift the conversation a little bit more about you, Joe. And the first question I have for you is, what is something about you or your life that you
Sorry, I had just a
no
hiccup.
problem.
Before we go too far in depth, just let me ask you this question.
Sure.
I did have a meeting starting at 1 because I only budgeted
Okay.
like 30 minutes for this. How much
Well, Joe, I really appreciate for having the podcast. It was a pleasure. This was Aryan Mahindra and Joe Vallone.